Oleksandr Usyk versus Daniel Dubois happening this Saturday in Poland. Very much looking forward to it. Now, before I go further, I just want to clarify my position on Daniel Dubois because after the last video I did about this fight, some people got it a little confused and thought that I was saying Daniel Dubois is some type of amazing fighter because I've been critical of Dubois in the past. And people are thinking, well, what's happened since you gave him that criticism for you to now do this complete 180 and rate Dubois so highly? Well, nothing. I don't rate Dubois so highly. Boxing is not like checkers, it's chess, as Dwyer often likes to say. It's rock, paper, scissors. So in rock, paper, scissors, the rock beats the scissors beat the paper, but the paper beats the rock. You see how that goes? Similar situation in boxing. So I think Daniel Dubois has a style and a mentality which might not be good enough to beat Joe Joyce, might not be good enough to even beat someone like Anthony Joshua, possibly, might not be good enough to beat Wilder or many other heavyweights. And it may not be good enough to beat heavyweights who Usyk could easily beat. But when it comes to Dubois fighting Usyk, that particular combination, that particular clash of styles, I give Daniel Dubois a better chance than most. I think stylistically, there are certain things there that work in his favor. Dubois, as I said in the previous video I did about this fight, has the ignorance and the arrogance of youth on his side. You guys remember when Anthony Joshua fought Dylan White? He was gung-ho, all bombs away. When Anthony Joshua fought Vladimir Klitschko in that 5th round, all bombs away. He attacked him, really set about him, let his hands go. Anthony Joshua has since become afraid to do that. But when he does do it, he's very dangerous. I mean, we saw that in the Klitschko fight because the first, 4 rounds against Klitschko, AJ was getting outboxed. Then he came out in the 5th round and said, okay, I've got to change something. He attacked Klitschko and he put him down within seconds. That's how quick a big, powerful heavyweight can turn a fight on its head if he lets his hands go, even against the top fighter. With Anthony Joshua, when he lets his hands go, he runs out of gas very quickly. He needs like 3 or 4 rounds to recover from a 5, 6, 7 punch combination of power shots. Daniel Dubois, from what I've seen of him in his career so far, has got much better natural stamina than AJ. He can let his hands go in a big combination and go again a few seconds later. He doesn't need to take many, many rounds off in order to recover, again, from what I've seen of him in the past. And Dubois is the kind of guy who loves to exchange. I mean, you go back to the Nathan Gorman fight, the Richard Lartey fight, particularly the Richard Lartey fight. He was exchanging, going hell for leather every time Richard Lartey put more than a couple of shots together. Dubois would straight away punch with him. He didn't care about what was coming back. Now, obviously, that can backfire for Daniel Dubois. And I'm sure it will backfire at some point in the future. But the fact that he's willing to do that against big, strong heavyweights, we know Richard Lartey's not a great fighter, but he's a big man and he can punch. Same with the Joe Joyce fight. Although he lost to Joyce, he was trying to exchange with him. Joyce was wise enough to keep him on the end of a jab and not give Dubois what he wanted, which was these exchanges. So if Daniel Dubois is willing to exchange with all these big, strong heavyweights, I do not think for a second that he'll be worried about letting his hands go on Oleksandr Usyk. He's going to charge at this guy. I mean, the way that Daniel Dubois would charge at somebody, it's not going to be particularly graceful. He doesn't have the slowest feet in the world, Dubois. He's not as slow on his feet as Frank Bruno because I've often compared him to Frank Bruno. There are a lot of similarities there. But foot speed is something Dubois has over Bruno. He is a bit lighter on his feet and a bit faster around the ring. With that being said, I don't think it's going to look particularly pretty when he tries to launch himself at Oleksandr Usyk. And that's what I think he is going to do based upon the training, the pad work and what have you that I've seen him conducting with Don Charles, his new trainer. And he's also brought in James Ali Bashir, who is, of course, the former trainer of Vladimir Klitschko. I think he also worked with Vitaly Klitschko a little bit as well. So obviously, James Ali Bashir used to train Oleksandr Usyk. So he'll have certain insights about what Usyk does well, what he doesn't do well, and so on. He didn't really let much of that out in this interview for obvious reasons. And he was very, very complimentary of Usyk. He said Usyk would beat Evander Holyfield if he fought in prime for prime easily. And I tend to agree with that. I've gone on record a couple years back and said that, for my money, Oleksandr Usyk is the greatest cruiserweight of all time. Better than Holyfield. For me, he fought better opponents at cruiserweight than Holyfield did. When Holyfield was a cruiserweight, the division was very new. So it didn't have that much depth in terms of talent. Don't get it twisted. There were some talented guys in the cruiserweight division that Holyfield fought. But overall, I would say Usyk fought better quality opposition at cruiserweight than Evander Holyfield did. And of course, back then, the cruiserweight division limit was, I think, 190 pounds, whereas today it's like 200 pounds. So, yeah, I think that Usyk is a better cruiserweight than Holyfield, and I think stylistically he would have beaten Holyfield. That's just my take on it. And James Ali Bashir says the same thing. In fact, he believes that Usyk would also beat Tyson Fury and that Fury wants no part of it. And remember, when he's making all these compliments towards Usyk, he's in the opposite corner this weekend. He's in Dubois' corner, yet he's being so complimentary towards Oleksandr Usyk. He says that Dubois has a very tall order to beat Oleksandr Usyk, but not an impossible order. And he complimented and praised Don Charles for having the humility to bring him in to the camp. Because obviously Don Charles is an experienced trainer in his own right, but he drawed for James Ali Bashir to give him a few extra insights and perhaps even to have some type of psychological impact on Oleksandr Usyk, bringing a guy in who knows some of your secrets and who's seen sparring sessions maybe where you didn't get it all your own way, so on and so forth. But Ali Bashir thinks that won't have any effect on Usyk. He's just totally stoic and extremely strong-minded. And when you're a boxer like Usyk, this is something you often see at the top level. The boxers, the guys who really are not knockout artists, they have to be strong, especially at heavyweight where you're going to be giving away enormous amounts of weight. They have to be mentally very tough because it's more intimidating going up against the big guy who can hurt you, but you can't really hurt him. Usyk has done that many times, going all the way back to the WSB, the amateurs, and so on. So he's very, very mentally strong. Yes, he is the favorite in this fight. I make Usyk the favorite, not just the bookies and most of you guys. He's the favorite in my mind too. But the reason that Daniel Dubois, I think, has a decent chance here is, again, I've talked about the ignorance and the arrogance of youth, the fact he's not afraid to let his hands go. He won't be like Anthony Joshua, standing around, in the first few rounds, worried about what's going to happen. No, he'll stick it straight on Usyk. Also, Usyk is 36 years of age. I was having a discussion with somebody in the Element group the other day about the Chisora fight, Usyk Chisora. Now, apparently Usyk has come out recently and said that he deliberately underperformed against Derek Chisora in order to secure the Anthony Joshua fight so that AJ wouldn't vacate the WBO belt and do something else. I don't really believe that, if I'm honest. I don't think that Usyk went out there and deliberately underperformed. I think that's a bit of kidology from Oleksandr Usyk. I'd like to see the interview where he said it and see whether he had a smile on his face when he did, because I don't believe that. I think that Derek Chisora wanted to attempt to close down the distance so quickly that it would force Oleksandr Usyk either to make mistakes or it would greatly reduce his offense. Because when a big heavyweight is charging at you like that, again, what are you going to do? Stand and try and punch with him? Some fighters are going to do that. But Usyk doesn't really have the power when a big guy's charging at you when he's fresh early in the fight to stand and punch. So he's going to move. And he's going to be moving faster than he wants to move, which means he's not going to have the time to get off the number of punches that he normally would. You see, and Derek Chisora gambled on that happening, and it was a successful strategy for the first few rounds. Derek Chisora was well in that fight through the first half. It's in the second half of the fight where he got tired because I guess he was gambling, or perhaps he was gambling, on trying to get Usyk out early. The gamble didn't pay off in that regard, but he did have a number of rounds under his belt. And again, in the mid rounds, he started to get tired. Derek Chisora actually got hurt at one point. But if you notice, when Oleksandr Usyk hurt Derek Chisora midway through that fight with a left hand, Chisora's legs wobbled and he backed up to the ropes, which is what Chisora typically does when he's hurt. He'll back up to the ropes and cover up. Oleksandr Usyk didn't follow him. He let Derek Chisora recover. Maybe that's what Usyk means by saying he deliberately underperformed, but even that I don't buy. I think the reason that Usyk didn't follow up and try and finish Derek Chisora off is because he was concerned about what might be coming back, because those first few rounds for Usyk were an ordeal. I think Usyk was a little shell-shocked, actually, by the ferocity of Chisora's attacks, and obviously dealing with a very physically strong man. He was much heavier than Usyk. What was he like? 20 or 30 pounds heavier. I know Chisora's slightly shorter, but he's a heavier man. So with Daniel Dubois, I think there's the possibility of seeing the same thing. I know there's differences between Dubois and Chisora. Chisora moves his head a lot better than Daniel Dubois. Chisora is shorter, so he can get underneath, or he was able to get underneath, a lot of Oleksandr Usyk's punches, whereas Daniel Dubois is more upright than that. And because he's more upright, Usyk will find it easier to see the target and walk Dubois onto shots. Yeah, and look, he can have a training camp with Don Charles where he's learning to fight more low and keep his head down and, fight out of a bit of a crouch. But ultimately, 8 or 10 weeks of doing that is not going to be enough for it to stick throughout the course of a 12-round bout. At some stage, if the fight goes long, Dubois is going to revert to his tried and tested stance, to what he's always been doing, which is an upright stance. And he'll start throwing more straight right hands from the upright stance rather than trying to come round with hooks and stuff like that. In fact, he might try go with a straight right hand early in the fight. We'll see. But yeah, Dubois, I think with his youth, with his energy, better stamina than Anthony Joshua, more confident than AJ at this point, sticking it on Usyk early, a guy who's 36. And that's the point I wanted to make. I nearly forgot. The discussion I was having in the Element group was with a guy who believes that Usyk is a better heavyweight now than he was when he fought Derek Chisora. Personally, I don't really agree with that. I can't see how Usyk would be a better heavyweight now than he was when he beat Derek Chisora. Now, people are going to say he's more used to the weight now. I don't think the issues he had against Chisora were so much to do with him not being used to the weight. It's to do with the way Chisora fought. You see, when Anthony Joshua was aggressive against Usyk in the rematch, he was able to back him up to the ropes. He was able to bully him around. It's just that he didn't do it very often. So, I don't see this thing as, oh, he's adjusted to being a heavyweight now. That's why AJ wasn't able to bully him like Chisora throughout the course of the 12 rounds or 24 rounds that they went. No, it was because AJ never stuck it on him the way Chisora did. Oleksandr Usyk's been fighting heavyweights for years, going all the way back to, again, the WSB when he fought Joe Joyce. So I don't think, and he's been sparring with heavyweights for years. He was sparring with Klitschko and all these people, getting the better of Klitschko, apparently, according to Johnny Nelson and several other people who were there. So, yeah, I don't buy this idea that Usyk is a better heavyweight now than he was when he fought Chisora, personally. I think, if anything, he's actually going to be a bit worse now than he was a few years ago. He's 36, hundreds of amateur fights. How many pro fights is that? Is it like 20 now? Yeah, 20 pro fights, 13 KOs. All those training camps. He's been relatively inactive, right? He hasn't fought since the Anthony Joshua fight, the Anthony Joshua rematch, which was, a year ago. So I think with his in fact, going back to the Joe Joyce fight in the amateurs, you could see that Usyk was faster in that Joe Joyce fight than he is today. There has been a deterioration. Remember, it was full-blown heavyweight, and he was faster in that fight, faster foot speed, faster hand speed, more supple and what have you back then than he is now. That's going to come with age. You're not going to be the same athlete, for most people anyway, unless you were a slob in your 20s and you only got in shape for the first time in your 30s. If you've been an athlete throughout the way that Usyk has, you're not going to be a better athlete when you're 36 than you were when you were 26. So Usyk is bound to have slowed down some over the years. And I think he would have that slowdown will have continued from the time when he fought Derek Chisora, which was back in, 2020, he fought Derek Chisora. So 3 years ago. He would have slowed down some over that time. I think this plays into Daniel Dubois' hands. I think he can maybe shock Usyk early by just bombarding him with punches, hurting him maybe to the body, hurting him to the head, dropping him possibly, and put Usyk in his box a little bit. Make him a little concerned about exchanging, or concerned at least about what's coming back. The way that Derek Chisora did, the way I think he did in that fight he had with Usyk, because again, Usyk hurt Chisora midway through the fight, but he didn't step in to finish him off. He stepped back and he was moving around. And this idea that he was trying to get AJ to underestimate him, yeah, again, I don't buy it. Some people are going to say it was so AJ wouldn't vacate the WBO belt, but other people would, and Usyk, for one, isn't going to care if somebody vacates a WBO belt, really, is he? Actually, let me take that back. he wants to be undisputed. So you get a chance to get 3 belts off AJ rather than one if you do fight him. But still, I don't buy the idea that he underperformed deliberately. I think it was the tactics of Derek Chisora that gave him trouble. And after that, he was a little shell shocked and he was very careful for the rest of the fight. Dubois might be able to do something like that. And long story short, if he does, there's the possibility here that it might be relatively close on the cards if it goes the distance. If Dubois manages to do enough damage early and make Usyk hesitant for the remainder of the fight, even if Usyk's picking up the close rounds. So that's the way I see it. Again, yeah, Usyk's the favorite, but an upset wouldn't shock me here. Now, I know there's a lot of people who are just picking Usyk to win this fight comfortably and have no trouble whatsoever. I think a lot of these people are of the same mindset as those people who thought that when AJ and Wilder were still undefeated, the only person who could beat AJ or beat Wilder or beat Fury was in that trio. Right? So there was no one outside of Fury, Wilder, and AJ who could beat any of those 3 fighters. So when AJ lost to Andy Ruiz, it was a massive shock to these people. It wasn't a shock to me. I knew that Andy Ruiz was dangerous. I gave Andy Ruiz a good chance. In fact, before Andy Ruiz became the opponent, I was saying Jerome Miller's got a good chance against AJ. And people were calling me crazy at the time. Go back and look at the videos. Still up on my channel. I was saying, I reckon Miller's got a good chance against AJ here. If he can take AJ's power, I'm telling you, stylistically, he's going to be a nightmare for AJ. And so I never bought this idea that there are just 3 fighters at the top of the division and nobody else can touch them. There's a massive chasm between the top 3 and everybody else. Never bought that. Never bought it. And I still don't buy it now. Obviously, AJ's fallen out of the top 3. It's now Usyk, Fury, and somebody else. Some people may say Wilder. I mean, pick who you want. I don't think that top 3 is impenetrable. I think that there are fighters outside of the top 3 who can beat the guys in the top 3 or the top 2. Let's just narrow it down to Usyk and Fury. Will Daniel Dubois prove himself to be one of those guys? We will see on Saturday. It certainly wouldn't shock me. Again, if I'm to give it a percentage in terms of Daniel Dubois' chances, I want to say he's got at least a 35% chance of winning this fight. But the one thing I will say, though, is the fact that fighting a southpaw is usually more difficult for pressure fighters than it is for boxers. Because pressure fighters often come in a bit square, and that really plays into a southpaw's hands. And again, with Derek Chisora, he was able to have success against Usyk that way. But again, he's shorter guy, comes in very, very low. I don't think Daniel Dubois can get that low. I don't think he's going to have the kind of upper body movement Chisora had to be able to do that. So he will be a bit more available for Usyk's counters. If Usyk was an orthodox fighter, I would give Dubois an even better chance, even with the same skill set that Usyk has. But the fact he's a southpaw means if Dubois is going to throw an arcing right hand, it has to travel so much further against the southpaw. So he's going to need to try and pin Usyk on the ropes where he can square Usyk up. Because when you're on the ropes, you tend to square up a bit. Unless you're a Mayweather with the shoulder roll, most fighters tend to square up a bit when they're against the ropes because their back leg can't go back any further. So their stance becomes squared. And that's when you're vulnerable to hooks and stuff like that. So Dubois is really going to have to get Usyk. He's going to have to maneuver him to the ropes before he lets the right hand go. The left hook might be more of a danger for Usyk in the middle of the ring than the right hook. But the straight right hand from Daniel Dubois could be effective at long range, okay? And here's me talking about pressure fighters. Daniel Dubois isn't really a pressure fighter. He's more of a boxer puncher. But for this fight, it would seem, based on the training I've seen him doing with Don Charles, he's going for that pressure style. He's trying to be more physical. He's trying to be more rough. I mean, he said in some interviews, Daniel Dubois, that he'll try and win this fight by any means necessary. He'll get rough. He'll get dirty. He needs to be careful with that. Obviously, I get the psychology behind it. You want to throw Usyk off, get him angry, get him upset. But when you're doing it in it's not exactly his actual home country, his actual backyard, but it's the next best thing. The officials, the judges, the referee, they're not going to be in your favor. And I get that Dubois not going over there looking for a points win. right? He knows he needs a knockout. Nevertheless, you don't want to start putting yourself in a position where you could get disqualified for using illegal tactics. So he needs to be careful with all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the southpaw thing, not ideal for Daniel Dubois, but I do think if he straightens up that right hand at long range, which he can do at the opportune moments, he can have success with that punch. But when it comes to the pressure stuff, getting close to Usyk, it'll be the left hooks, maybe right hands to the body, and when he gets Usyk to the ropes, then he can bring the right hooks, the arcing right hands into play a bit more. I expect Usyk to have a tough time here, a tougher time than he had against Anthony Joshua, even if he manages to stop Daniel Dubois, because there are some people thinking Usyk's going to stop Dubois. I can see it. I think it's possible. If he disheartens Dubois enough, we may see that same look on Dubois' face that he had in the Joe Joyce fight, where he, looks like he doesn't want to be there. And he might decide, you know what, it's time for me to get out of here. Maybe his eye swells up again, the same eye potentially that swelled up against Joe Joyce. So yeah, I can see what people are saying with regards to Usyk maybe stopping Dubois later on in the fight. Even if that happens, I expect Dubois to have his fair share of success early on. Maybe I'll turn out to be wrong. Maybe Dubois will go out there and freeze. Maybe I'm underestimating Oleksandr Usyk. Obviously, I'm very, very high on Oleksandr Usyk and how good he is. But maybe he's even better than I think. And he'll handle Daniel Dubois with absolute ease. Let's see. But personally, I think he's in for a rough ride in, let's say, the first 4 or 5 rounds at least. Then maybe if he survives that intact, he can get on top of the fight and tame Daniel Dubois. Let's see what happens. Give me your thoughts in the comments. Are you sick and tired of the mainstream mindset? Does the dogmatic conformity and pathological ignorance have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Then don't be alone. Come and join our brotherhood on Patreon. We stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. You'll gain access to my weekly topical podcast where we take more deep dives than Jacques Cousteau on an endless variety of subjects. There's also videos, interviews, live Q&As, as well as a vast back catalogue of previous episodes, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen via the Patreon app or download in high-quality MP3. Connect with myself and hundreds of other members in our Element chat group. There's no contract, no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a Mickey D's McMuffin. Just head to my Patreon page via the link below this video and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. I'll see you over there.